This is Capturing Light, episode number 139 with Benji Bakshi.
Welcome to Capturing Light, a director of photographers podcast, spotlighting cinematography tips, tools, and techniques, inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. And now, your host, Les Gaddis.
Welcome to the Capturing Light podcast. I'm your host, Les Gaddis, and today we're talking to Benji Bakshi, fantastic cinematographer, one of the DPs of Star Trek: Strange New World. You can watch that series on Paramount Plus. We talk about other projects too, and we talk for quite some time, so I want to just jump right into the conversation. Here is that conversation with Benji Bakshi. Benji, how's it going? I appreciate you coming on the Capturing Light podcast.
Absolutely, Les. Glad to be here, and thanks for having me.
Yeah, so let's start with, how did you get started in the industry?
I got started, I want to say technically, when I was maybe an early teenager watching a documentary show, I think on Discovery Channel, called Movie Magic. And it was animatronics and special effects and things like that. And there's all this behind the scenes stuff. And until then, I had really only understood filmmaking as there's a director and there's actors, and of course there's cameras, and you literally just push the button. So I thought the director was kind of the only filmmaking role. And this opened my eyes to, wow, there's all these people working together, collaborating, figuring things out, having a vision and seeing it come to life. So I grabbed my parents' camcorder and ran around the backyard, and I was, given the task of pulling the weeds out of the backyard, which in the summertime were sort of daunting. And I thought, there's so many weeds in this backyard. If they talk to each other, they could probably overtake us. So I shot my first movie called Weeds. And it was like a Hitchcockian horror movie where the weeds are talking and growing fast and attacking.
Right.
And then I edited it on my parents' VHS, recorder, tape player. I forget what it's even called.
Yeah.
And it was like pressing play and pressing record, and we put it together linearly.
Yeah. Tape to
There
tape
it is.
editing.
There's a movie. In some ways, it's like possibly one of the most cohesive shorts I ever made. It was just so simple.
That's funny.
And from there, I got the bug, and I wanted to just make movies with my friends. That was fun for us. So moving into the idea of college and career, I thought, well, this is so much fun for me, and I know that it can be a career, so this is what I want to pursue. And up until then, my exposure to creativity was classical music, because music is a generational thing in my family. My grandmother was a pianist, and my mother's a pianist and still a piano teacher. And ultimately, my wife, who I met later, is a violinist and pianist, and we met in the youth orchestra scene in the Philadelphia area. So that was really big part of my life, and that's how I understood creativity. So going into college, I sort of realized I'm a musical person, but what I love about the musical experience is the narrative aspect of it, that you're sort of telling a musical story. And I learned this new skill of being able to tell a visual and chronological story. So I went to Temple University to study, and they handed me a Bolex 16 millimeter camera and said, here's a light meter, go expose this film. And I thought, wait, you can just hold this thing and learn the technicals and create shots and put them together, and that's the story, and that's called cinematography. You can just do that part. And they're like, yeah, you can. I was like, that's what I want to do. I don't really want to do all the aspects of it. I just want to learn my instrument and master it. and tell the story through that medium. So that I was totally hooked, and pursued that through undergrad, and then worked in the Philadelphia area, and sort of, as a PA, as an AC, camera operator and gaffer, and then worked my way to start getting paid gigs as a DP. And my sights were always set on AFI. And one of the graduates of Temple University who became a working cinematographer, his name was Chris Manley, who at the time was doing indies.
Mm-hmm.
And he was a great help, giving me guidance, and ultimately wrote my recommendation for AFI. So I ended up going to that program and having a terrific time. And I won the ASC Heritage Award coming out of there for my thesis film. And from there, I got a chance to sort of restart my DP career in LA. And
Right.
that path is sort of captured on IMDb from that point forward.
Right.
So
So, I was gonna ask, do you think that that particular thesis project that was kind of like the slingshot into um or that pivot point into where you feel like, okay, career is kind of going exactly, I don't say exactly, but the direction you want, and you're feeling like, all right, I'm doing it. I'm where I want to be.
it was definitely a milestone. That said, there was a bunch of milestones along the way, and I think that that is something to celebrate and to
Hmm.
always remember what your milestones are when they happen, and sometimes they're unexpected. So, for example, getting into Temple University undergrad when I basically had almost no experience or even understanding what the industry is, that
Hmm.
was important for me. And getting certain projects accomplished along the way, even
Right.
like feeling proud of some of the black and white 16 millimeter film that I had exposed. I was like, oh, I did that. I can figure this out. That's really cool. So those are the jolts I think you need, and the affirmation to get you to the next place, because it's sort of never ending, right? I mean, even
Right.
at the top of our industry, people are always still trying to find a new thing to do.
Right.
Um, and for example, I applied the first time and I was denied.
Hmm.
And I thought, oh man, I've been working and I thought I had a pretty good reel, and I'm really hungry to do this. And I thought that I would be a good applicant, and I didn't get in. And that really crushed me. And I thought, should I apply the next time? Because I was, like I said, starting to get some real traction getting paid jobs as a DP in the Philadelphia area. I thought, should I leave that, and take a huge risk and pay a lot of money and uproot to go try this thing?
Right.
And in the end, I kept thinking more and more about it. And I thought, well, I have to try. I really want to shoot movies in Hollywood, not for the fame of it, but because of the quality of the projects and the ability to learn how to really do what I'm seeing and following my heroes. So I
Right.
applied again and basically just tried harder, and I got better advice from Chris Manley, who surprisingly encouraged me that the essay portion was higher weighted than I might have thought. I thought, well, it's cinematography, so who cares about writing? but but they
Right.
really want to know who you are, and that's your storytelling ability.
Right.
So I did get in the next time, and I thought, yes, of course I'm gonna go. So the award coming out of AFI was definitely, fun. And I got to go to the ASC Awards and get on stage and be seen. And it helped me meet, junior agents who
Right.
still at that point, it's not like they just said, hey, I'll represent you. Let's go shoot big movies. It was a long process even from there,
Right.
but it got some exposure to be seen. And from there, it was still a grind. I mean, I was still like looking on Craigslist
Right.
for gigs to get. And sometimes my friends or colleagues from AFI or other places would have something like, we're going to shoot a feature for $30,000 and, in 10 days, let's go. It's like,
Right.
okay,
Yeah.
let's do it. But I also was looking for new relationships and things that just paid the bills and helped me to keep practicing. So I don't want to say that it really catapulted me. It was like
Hmm.
yet another step in a sort of never-ending staircase. And there's lots of opportunities to get that exposure, whether it's like the Emerging Cinematographer Awards or any kind of festival with shorts or this and that. And I think if you're doing good work, so much is being seen now that you'll there's a lot of paths to take, um, no matter where you're starting.
Right. Let's kind of continue on the same kind of line of navigating the industry with obviously you said you came from PA to AC to cam op to DP. Like what was that transition from AC into cam mopping and cam op into DPing? Because it's sometimes it's hard to break out of like an AC position, like in my case where it's like, okay, I might still be getting calls to AC stuff when I'm obviously, DPing things now, and like how did you kind of make that pivot?
Yeah, I think it's a unique path for everybody. In my case, I was making that transition mostly in the Philadelphia film scene, which at the time was basically consisted of Night Shyamalan movies and commercials and industrial videos. That was kind
Right.
of like, and then everybody's short film or self-funded feature or something like that. So I wasn't breaking into the Hollywood Union films that were coming to town. I did dabble a little bit in some of the TV shows as a PA, and that showed me the scope of some of this stuff.
Hmm.
Uh, and I like watched the DPs come on set and work, and I was like, wow, they really know a lot, and I have a long way to go. But for the projects that I was exposed to, they were small enough that the role of AC and the role of gaffer and these sort of things, you weren't doing the same job, but it wasn't difficult to migrate between those jobs from between projects. So I could be a gaffer on this project and I could be an AC on this project, and then I could be a camera operator on a different one, kind of all at
Hmm.
the same time.
Right.
And people knew that I had a DP career in mind and that I had those visual skills. But sometimes they just were working with more experienced people because there was a client to serve or whatever the situation was. So they gave me a chance to be around the camera, but to do one of the roles that was, supporting the DP. So I learned a lot of that stuff in a non-union world, and it was very sort of flexible. And then I just pushed as hard as I could to be the DP on as many of those smaller projects as I could. And the more I did that, my collaborators would then get a chance to have a paid job that wasn't too far above me that I couldn't jump in.
Right.
So I was able to slowly climb and start taking those DP projects on the smaller scale to the point where I was growing the opportunities and mostly working as a DP and nothing else until I sort of found that to shoot Hollywood projects and make them look better, which was my real goal. I was like, how do I make my work better?
Right.
I had to set my sights on AFI and reinvest in that.
Right, for sure. And with making your work better, let's talk a little bit because I'm looking at your website now, and I just want to get your perspective on just how do you um, how do you curate like your how do you judge yourself and putting your best foot forward as a creative, but also too putting out work and not holding it close to the chest, and like what's the balance between like the curation of getting good work out there and putting it out there, versus saying, "Oh, okay, I gotta hold this close to the chest," and like as a creative, like, what do you have anything, a perspective on that portion of it?
You mean how to like whittle down what you actually show?
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
That's one of the hardest things, especially as you're growing, um, because seeing outside the frame
Mm-hmm.
is essentially what we're trained to. I felt I was trained to do as I was, developing my eye, which of course I'm still doing, and I still have this problem, which is
Right.
like I love that shot because I had to work really hard and or it was really risky and all these things. But being able to judge your work objectively is, I don't know. I don't know if you can even really ever do it, but
Right.
definitely coming out of college and as I was building my first DP reels, um, I really didn't know what people were going to respond to. Sometimes I
Mm-hmm.
thought this is a great performance, but I don't really like the shot. Then I thought,
Right.
oh, I really love the lighting or the time of day we really nailed, but there's something weird about it. Like there's a bump in the camera move, or the actors are kind of doing something goofy to where it feels like budget. And that's
Right.
always the thing is literally everything in the frame has to work and feel cinematic for
Right.
you to get the credit of doing the work. And more as I was cutting my reels, I would be sensitive to, I just need the best performance,
Right.
because when you see a performance that doesn't feel authentic, or it somehow bumps you, it's a telltale sign that the project you were on, you know, wasn't attuned to that,
Right.
or um, the director might not have had the sensibility to craft that performance, or whatever the reason. I think that the performance ends up being the thing that you really want to show. Is as a cinematographer, I was a part of supporting or sometimes just not getting in the way of an actor doing a great job.
Right.
And you do that, some of my favorite movies were like Dogma 95, Anthony Dodd Mantle kind of, um, just running and feeling the story and not being so concerned about a double shadow or what things were looking like in a way, because they were embracing the full naturalism of it. And these stories were so deep and intense. I was like, wow, that's cinematography, you know?
Right.
And as your resources increase, you're usually able to get more stylized or make
Mm-hmm.
some of these decisions and be limit your color palette, or make rules that you can follow what you're doing with the camera. And that's when, in a way, the more traditional like cinematic style can become evident. My point is, it's always a struggle,
Right.
and things that are on my website at any given moment, guaranteed I've like gone back and forth 10 times. Oh, I
Mm-hmm.
think I should leave this up there, or maybe I need more up there. And sometimes I get in a mode where I get ruthless. I'm like, only the best needs to be up here. You know,
Right.
if there's second best, I just got to pull it off. So it oscillates. And I think that's really one of the trickiest things. That said, I'm glad you brought it up, because your reel as a DP is the most important thing. It's how
Right.
everybody knows you, and you can meet someone and get along with them, but the real is how they regard you.
Mm-hmm.
Unless you've worked with people for a long time in a repeat fashion, and they know and trust you, and that they don't really care or even look at your reel anymore. But
Right.
usually you're always showing somebody your work, even if it's a new producer or even an actor, somebody you're collaborating with, they don't know you. That's your front door.
Right.
How do you do it?
No, that's a really good perspective. And yeah, like you said, the real is like the front door, and just not being a complete asshole is how you have longevity in it, you know, in the career when you start working with people. Yeah, like from a curation standpoint on my part, like I'm constantly just it's one of those things that I feel like I've gotten a lot better when even looking at my own work, and sometimes I'll ask for just constructive criticism, and knowing that, hey, if I'm asking for a constructive criticism, I'm looking for that and I'm not looking for validation. And just because someone says, you know what, this, I'm not feeling it, or I don't like the shot, or whatever, it's not like okay, I'm not feeling you, or I don't like you. And, like just that separation between, a shot or project and personal. Like for me, in my early days, I just took everything so personal, and just learning through and just growing and realizing after, then this is after my first feature that I did back in 2015 or whatever. I was like, you know what? Like I've already proven that I've proven to myself that I belong in this space, and that's all that matters to me. Like there's, you know, like at this point now, there's nothing to prove, and I just want to make good work. I want to continue to enjoy, the process and grow, and continue to get better images. So, talking to other cinematographers, and like having them kind of help in critiquing it. Oh, this is how I did this, or like this is how you do this, and getting a little bit better here and there. Like I can honestly look at some of my work now and just like you said, okay, if this feels inauthentic because of some random collection of weird things happening in a frame, or then it's just like, okay, let me just put that aside. It was a good try, but only trying to put the best that I can in a reel. And in this content creation, social media society, that gets hard when everyone's always looking for content. But just me trying to balance, okay, hey, these are great frames, but also too, like, hey, I mean, I kind of don't mind, even if it's in a story type setting on Instagram, just showing the parts of failure where it's just like, hey, like I'm trying and this didn't work. But I'm not just gonna show you all of my good stuff. I'm gonna say, hey, I tried this and it didn't work. You might only be able to catch it for 24 hours before it disappears off a story. Um, but yeah, I mean that's a really, that's something that I'm thinking about too, as far as curation and trying to figure out, like, okay, how do I keep putting my best foot forward, but still, feeling authentic to myself, but then also too, like in this society of everything being so glitz and glam and polished, like saying, okay, well, I, I mess up just like everybody else. Like, you know, like just being more of a real person versus like this, amazing cinematographer that only puts out the best work and never gets anything wrong.
Yeah, it's I think when you have enough material, well, that's all relative too, but I always started with the things, the images that I loved. And
Hmm.
if I had choice of to omit a lot of things, I would just choose the style that I like. It's like, oh, I like darker stuff. And it's like, I'm just going to choose a lot of that. And sometimes I had the um, feeling like I need to show variety.
Hmm.
And there is, I guess, merit to that because you don't want to feel show people that you're only doing one thing.
Right.
But you really should only, I think, put images on your reel that you love and that
Right.
are your favorite. And I think that it might be more effective to make the strongest 30-second reel you can than to put 5 minutes of stuff that's a lot of repeat.
Right.
Like, oh, I'm showing this shot from this scene, and I'm going to show some other stuff, and I'm going back to that scene because that's also good. And part of it too is I actually hired after some years, I hired an editor who was my friend to cut my reel. I
Mm-hmm.
thought this thing needs to be edited and it needs to go to music, and in some ways you're judged on that too.
Right,
So
for sure.
it's like all the disciplines that you don't want to have to be responsible for, like the music selection, the performance of the actor, the editing. It's like you're putting out this work, and all those things matter.
Mm-hmm.
And I immediately saw a better response to my reel. I was like, oh, this is cut really well. It makes it look like the shots are supposed to go there. So
Right.
it made them stronger. So that's an aspect of it too. But there is a point where a compilation reel is great, like we were talking about as a front door. But
Mm-hmm.
I think in the narrative world, people just want to see your complete work and hear of the project you did. And that carries, what I've experienced, so much more weight
Right.
when they've heard of your work and seen that movie or something like that. That can be enough. And the compilation reel is, oh, you've done some other stuff too.
Right.
But to get there, to get those opportunities, you still need the front door.
Right. Yeah, I know that we'll get to Star Trek, The Strange New World, which is your latest work. But I'm still stalking your stalking your website, and I see that you've done Bone Tomahawk too. Can you tell me a little bit about like just that project, how you got started with it, and how that came about?
It totally, in the context in we'll do that again. Um, in the context of our discussion about finding your path and milestones and the mentality of always being in a place of growth in your career, I did a movie called Big Ass Spider.
Okay.
And this movie, I was connected with the director who sent a message to AFI looking for DPs. And I responded, and we hit it off, and he liked my reel. We've been talking about cutting your reel,
Mm-hmm.
and we connected personally. And this movie was really zany, lots of visual effects, huge spiders, and all this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And I wasn't quite sure what to think about it. I was like, well, this is kind of like a crazy genre movie. But I decided to go with it because I thought the script was hilarious. And we ended up shooting, and it was, a 3 weeker, 6 day weeks, the whole thing. We're running around LA and doing our best. It was a silly little project, but it came together really well. And did South by Southwest and all this. And a director saw that and came to me and wanted to shoot his project called Some Kind of Hate. And this was a low budget horror movie. And at the time, I had bought some cow anamorphics because I really wanted to shoot more anamorphic. And sometimes it was hard to rent them. So I thought, well, I'll invest in them and then I can shoot them. So we
Right.
shot this movie on cow anamorphics, and it was a great time. And we tried to make it as cinematic as we could. And the movie did well. And the producer of that project, um, at at the end, came to me and said, I've got another project that I think you might really like. And he was working with a writer director named Craig Zoller. And this project was called Bone Tomahawk. And it was a Western, really, kind of gritty, kind of in the vein of The Searchers, a lot of
Mm-hmm.
exteriors, all this stuff. And they had Kurt Russell on board and a bunch of other actors, Patrick Wilson, Richard Jenkins, Matthew Fox, all these guys. And it was a really great cast for that project. And because of my work on that low budget feature, Some Kind of Hate, um, they thought I would be a great fit. And once again, meeting a new director. we looked at my reel. We actually watched it together, and he was like, "I like that. I like that. That's good. Oh, what did you do here?" And sometimes, oh, I don't really like that as much, but that's okay. And we sort of scrutinized it, and we talked about working together and his approach to it, and we went for it. So that project was a tier zero union feature,
Mm-hmm.
pretty much meaning they had set it up to be a non-union project, but because of the caliber of the talent, it was almost impossible to, try to do a project non-union. And of course, the crew wanted it to be union anyway.
Right.
So the union agreed to work with them, but to keep the rates um, you know low enough that they could still make the movie.
Right.
So we were out there shooting for 4 or 5 weeks. I think it was 21 days. Out there in movie ranches, Santa Clarita. We shot in a place called Paramount Ranch in Malibu, which burned down in the
Oh
fires.
wow.
Yeah, so it's since gone. It's been immortalized in many projects, but ours too. Like they shot season one of Westworld there. I
Mm-hmm.
was like seeing all these nostalgic places that we shot. So that project was, it never felt like there was enough resources. Like we needed more time. We were shooting pretty high page counts. We were out there in lots of natural light. And the interiors, partly because of speed, partly because of sensibility, we were going for a really like moody, contrasty look. And we just sort of leaned on that.
Mm-hmm.
And after the project came together, um, even when it was finished and I saw an edit, I was really upset. I was disappointed in my work because I had a vision of what it could have been. And
Mm-hmm.
because of the circumstances, um, part of it was Craig Zoller's style that he wanted to shoot the movie in, which we did and ultimately was really successful, is he wanted to track the protagonist of each scene. He considered each scene having its own protagonist because it sort of followed these four men almost equally.
Mm-hmm.
We were just tracking them throughout the room. And at first I thought, okay, these are moving shots, and then we'll break it up and stuff. But he really wanted to just do the whole scene that way. We did do what we call coverage, which is like they'd get to a certain place and we'd relight it. But it was really challenging, and it meant we had to light more broadly and things like that.
Right.
And when I saw it, I just, in prep, I had an idea of what this movie could look like and the shots that I would get and the lighting that I could do. And I saw the result and I just thought I could have done so much better.
Mm-hmm.
I was really upset. And then the movie got a lot of traction. It was nominated for some Indie Spirit Awards and won some festivals and did really well. And it's still actually on sort of the high end of Western lists and things like that. And a lot of people have seen the movie. And for a time, that's what people sort of knew me from was that
Right.
film. And I thought, but that's not my best work.
Right.
So I was wrestling with that. And other people would say, oh, but it was so good, so don't worry about it, and we know you can do better and things like that. But it's difficult when you try so hard and the technicals become such a part of your work when they don't line up. For example, our days would go long and the next day we would start late, and the scene that could have been shot in early morning beautiful light was shot like midday. And I'm like,
Right.
well, that's not how we wanted it to look.
Right.
The sun's just beaming down on them. And then it's like, oh, we got to turn around and shoot this now because this actor's not ready, or we just need to do it that way. And I'm like, but what, we got to look this way first. That's the way it's lit. So the circumstances were really challenging, and
Mm-hmm.
I took it, like you said, I took it personally. I thought,
Mm-hmm.
no, I could have done better. That said, over time, the more I shot, the more I got to put the images that were more like what I had planned on screen, and the more movies I did, and ultimately TV shows, that the feeling of that melted away, and I can now watch the movie and sort of embrace the energy of it, which is, I think, the success. And that goes back to some of the things we talked about earlier, namely, a great performance is the most impactful thing to the audience.
Right.
And I don't think there's anything in Bone Tomahawk that um, feels like it detracts from the movie that I shot. At the time I did, but
Mm-hmm.
it definitely has parts where it sings, and I felt really proud of it. But we honored the style that the director wanted, which ultimately honored the performance, because this style was, let's track with them handheld, and really, like, not get in the way, let these performers do their best job. And that's what we were focused on, and I think that's why the movie had success. So
Right.
in that context, moving forward, I was like, well, I just need to find ways to both honor the performance and, you know, do what I would call better cinematography. And that was a huge learning lesson. But once again, a milestone to where I was being associated with movies that people had seen and thought were pretty good. And
Mm-hmm.
that became a notch in the belt to where I could be considered for projects that before that I wouldn't have been.
Right. So, and you talk about, like, getting better. I guess my question would be from like a bone tomahawk situation where it's tier zero, and you're moving toward higher, I guess, budget projects and things. Like, what's like how do you, is it in the pre-production? Is it like, how do you maintain like as much of what you saw in your head and it translating onto film, or like into data, um versus like going through a project and realizing, oh well, shit, I wasn't able to, this is not how I saw it in my head. And then like, here we are again, a year later on a different project. Like, how do you, like, I guess, continue to work on like having those images in your head translate on, you know, onto the screen?
Yeah, it's essentially, it's like, how do you improve?
Right.
And um I think so much of it is experience. Um Earlier in my career, I didn't value that because
Mm-hmm.
I hadn't been through it. And also, it's your eye. I mean, I think that your eye comes with experience, but it can come from other things too. And there, I've seen colleagues or just other cinematographers who, in a sense, had less experience, and they really took off in their careers and were getting really amazing opportunities, essentially faster than me,
Mm-hmm.
uh, for what that's worth. But and I would wonder, how did that happen?
Mm-hmm.
And seeing it now retrospectively, it's they just had a great eye. They were able to see something in their head and be there on set and find a way to be happy with with their image, meaning not that they settled, but what they were happy with maybe was sort of like more elevated than I could have at the time.
Right.
I don't want to get in a game of comparison, but just to almost applaud um, those around me who I saw, that I was like, wow, how did they make it look so good? And
Right.
in a way, we might have had similar circumstances. So I think that comes with experience, but also just honing your actual eye. And that
Mm-hmm.
is a really difficult thing to express, especially verbally. Like part of the reason I got into the imaging side of creativity is I don't want to use words to describe things. I just want to
Right.
show people. But the sensibility of your own eye, um, there were times when I was really excited about an opportunity that I was essentially competing for or something like that, and that I didn't get. And I would go through the debriefing process of why didn't I get it? And
Hmm.
I'd look at some of the other people's work who maybe did, or just who else was out there, because I think it's really healthy to want to learn from each other and to see what other people are doing. And I'd say, wow, like, how did they do that? How did they? This looks so great. I don't know that I could have seen the image this way.
Hmm.
Uh, and I think that comes from just living life,
Right.
honestly, like outside of the film industry and seeing beauty in things. And like I was saying earlier, respecting the actual performance and feeling like the lighting is part of that performance. Um, I'm going to talk about Chris Manley again. And while I was at AFI, he came and did a um, sort of on set um, shooting experience with us, which was something we would do on a weekly basis, where he was the DP and we would be his crew, and we would learn from them. And a lot of cinematographers came in and did this. One of the things he said was at a certain point when he was trying to do better work, which again, everybody is, but he was really sort of like focused on what are the methods I need to use.
Hmm.
But he sort of like went into matrix vision and sort of like almost glazed his eyes over and wasn't looking at the details of what was in front of him as much as the overall form, the light and shadow, like how contrast was working, like put light against dark and dark against light, and things like that, and almost ignore everything else. And that helped him really um, just be ruthless about crafting the images that he was working on. I thought that was a really amazing way to change your perspective. And so I grasped onto that for a while. And I realized after trying his advice, yeah, I haven't been thinking about contrast as much. I haven't been thinking about like how I'm putting people into like portions of the frame and what's around them and things like that. So the actual formality
Hmm.
the work, I think it has so much to do with expressing the story.
Right. And I mean, you said quite a bit of interesting things as far as like from uh like the experience of life, and the experience in the industry helping to, create better images to improve, getting better over time. From like a completely non-industry specific standpoint, like where do you get inspiration from? And I know you've mentioned music, which ironically, like I went to school for music as well, and I interview so many cinematographers that have like this strong connection to music. But I'm just wondering what other ways, help keep you inspired, creatively.
I've really always felt and still do that because I had this sort of um, oscillating path in my youth of studying different forms of creativity. Um, that cinematography is a phenomenon that exists because the tools exist, and this is a filmmaking is a method of storytelling um, built around those tools. So filmmaking wouldn't be a medium. We wouldn't have developed it if we had completely different tools to work with and not those, if that makes sense.
Right.
So we have a camera that can capture, and we have these things, and we put the sound together, and we're also tracking the biological reality of how our eyes see with latency of or just called a persistence of image, for example, where you're not seeing the flicker, you're seeing the movement and things like that. So cinematography, what is it really? And I've come to accept that it's storytelling through the visual sensation, which is obvious, but it's the storytelling aspect that's the most important. And I talked a little earlier about on your reel, honoring performances and how much they matter in the takeaway when people watch your work. And the best cinematography is the best performance. And it's the most motivated image. I think the most beautiful image is a meaningful one. So formally, I think the contrast and lighting and camera moves and all these things support the concept and meaning behind what you're trying to give the image, but the meaning itself is the value. So for a while, I was studying film and immersed in film and watching film, and those were really inspiring um, ways to develop my eye. But I think feeling a deeper connection to life in some way, especially outside the industry, I think is the way to see the beauty in a film. And it's
Right.
definitely the way to create beauty in films that haven't been made yet. Because ideally, the images you're making are completely unique to you and the film. So, as much as you can be inspired by other cinematographers and things you've seen, and in some way, you can make the argument that nothing is new and everything is copied. But I think there's enough circumstances around a given film in this time and place, even if it's a remake,
Mm-hmm.
that so specific and you're making so many decisions that it will never really be um, the same thing. So I think that having a deeper connection to life, like I'm a father and watching my child grow up is like changed how I see things and the value that I place on different kind of imagery because of my life experience. So it's a
Right.
bit of an intangible, but I think that the more deeper meaning um, you can experience and allow yourself to take in, I think that it's going to find its way through your work.
Right. For sure. And another question that I had, and this is something that I ask quite a bit of the cinematographers that I have on the show, is just advice, like that you would give to someone that's just starting out. Maybe they stumbled on your website, or, maybe they looked you up because they saw, Bone Tomahawk or Star Trek Strange New Worlds, and they're like, man, like, this this cinematographer, this DP, like I want to do what he does. Like, how do I start, or what do I work on, or like, do you have any advice to that person?
Take your parents' camcorder and run around in the backyard. I mean, I do hold that um, idea with me. I've held it all along the way, which is I chose to pursue this industry because it was really fun. And I've absolutely had moments or even periods where it didn't feel fun, and those are tough. But it's really competitive, and there's a lot of, I would say, noise swirling around in the form of vanity or I don't know, the artificiality of the image of things,
Hmm.
or maybe it's just chasing money or things like that. I mean, Hollywood has many, many ugly sides. So those are things that I consider challenges to have to um, try to not get trampled under, or how do you work with people you might feel have those personalities and still try to do work that you think is meaningful because you have to still work together. um those are I think the biggest challenges. Is one, how do you acquire the motivation to get out and actually just try something.
Mm-hmm.
And two, how do you continue to do that when um, along the way you are required to um, work with people you don't necessarily get along with, or feel like they don't understand your position or the value you're bringing. So, they're at odds with you in terms with how you should make this movie. And it's
Right.
it's more, I think it's more nuanced than, well, we don't have the money, so you can't get this light or this camera or whatever. It's more about what's the most important way to tell this story.
Right.
And do we think the movie is going to be good in the end? And I liked talking about Bone Tomahawk because it wasn't a Cinderella story. It wasn't perfect in the making of it or even my feelings afterwards, but we did everything we could to honor the story and the performance, and that's what ultimately like made money for the people who made it, right?
Right.
So um my advice is to retain and grasp onto the excitement of why you would want to be in this industry in the first place, and really never let that go. My friend and I, who's also in the industry, we reference those times when we were running around with a camera. We've known each other for almost our whole lives, and we call it being in the mood.
Mm-hmm.
Someone could say, an actor is motivated or, locked into their performance, or a filmmaker is, in their creative flow state or something like that. But we just kind of shorthand call it being in the mood. When you're in the mood, when you like absolutely love a project and you love this scene and you're so excited about bringing it to life, and you give yourself the freedom to make mistakes or try this and sort of like not settle until what you're seeing on screen really moves you there in the moment. That's sort of being in the mood. And I think that's the great work. And that's the filmmakers who don't let anything get in their way when they're doing that are making things that really move me. So stay in the mood.
Right. Man, that's amazing advice for sure. So now let's get to Star Trek Strange New Worlds. Because I know that I mean that's a very popular show and I know a lot of people want to hear about it. Can you talk about like how you got brought onto the project and what it was like working on such a like I guess big show? Because I mean there's such a huge following of Trekkies out there.
Yeah, absolutely. I was watching reruns of Star Trek Next Generation when I was younger. Pretty much watched it religiously every day. And so I came to know Star Trek when I was younger and watched a lot of the movies and things like that. And it was always this sort of like quintessential sci-fi world where the
Hmm.
logic and the philosophy was the basis of the narrative. And some of the aesthetics changed over time. I mean, Star Trek as a whole, you look at it, and like the original series or Deep Space Nine or the movies and the new movies and things like that, they all look pretty different. So whereas some other franchises like try to stick a little closer to certain things.
Hmm.
But um I knew Star Trek for a long time, but I had never worked in that world. So this was my first Star Trek experience, and I I was connected with the show through my agent, who submitted me as is done. And when I first got a response, because they were interested in talking, this was a totally new show that hadn't aired, and they were interested in talking to me about season two. I was like, well, where's season one? It hadn't even aired yet. It was like almost, like several months later. So I
Right.
thought, oh, this is a new show. I didn't really know anything about it. So they gave me access to some of the season one material, and I watched that, and I thought it was really different. I thought it was, unlike some of the other Trek shows out there, and unlike some of the other streaming shows in general. They were back to like an episode of the week kind of format, different genres. It was really like energetic and positive, and it was like, this is just fun, once again,
Right.
bring me back to the backyard with the camcorder, like, hey,
Mm-hmm.
let's just have a good time, people wearing alien costumes, why not?
Right.
So we had a discussion about it, and the approach that they took was super cool. They were shooting on large format Cook anamorphics special flares, which had been essentially specially made for their show at the time. And their tone for stylistically for the show, they said, was Lawrence of Arabia in space. I was like,
Wow.
wow, this is great. It's kind of like not a throwback or nostalgic look, but they're honoring the traditional filmmaking approach. And I was like,
Right.
that's really cool that, they're not as interested in quicker cuts and these sorts of things. They want shots to play out and be sequences. So I really just loved it because my career was all about feature films, and in TV, sometimes some of that gets a little undone. I
Mm-hmm.
did not, of course. So this felt like a great fit. And I spoke with Glenn Keenan, who was the cinematographer on Star Trek Discovery before, and then he did the pilot and a lot of season one, and we really hit it off, and we sort of became, partners. And in season two, there's actually three DPs on that season. There's me, Glenn Keenan, and Ian Anderson, who worked in season one. I think officially it was like called a second unit position, but he was really a great support. So that was the first time I had ever worked with three rotating DPs on only 10 episodes.
Right.
And we sort of became this team, like almost like we had the DP department.
Right.
We're always referencing each other's episodes, and sometimes we'd have to fill in for each other. There was like COVID happening and scheduling issues and things like that. So we'd ultimately end up shooting little pieces of each other's episodes. So um,
So, what's the working relationship like? I mean, to have like a cohesive and singular vision, or just that collaboration process between three DPs on one show.
to my pleasure, and part of the reason I was really excited to work on this project was that each episode was basically considered its own genre, and we had pretty much complete freedom to take it in a direction. So there's some things about the ship, like the bridge, which is where they, fly the ship and things like that. There's certain functions and looks that need to be cohesive because they just need to operate a certain way.
Right.
But in terms of the mood, like how dark it gets or not, um, we were really able to use our instincts. So there was a lot to learn in a sense when I first started, because the sets are embedded with LEDs all throughout the walls, on tabletops, in doorways, all these places. There's literally millions of diodes throughout these sets, and every set has one or more like dimmer board setups and things like that. So it was daunting because I was like, I feel like there's too many options. And
Right.
if I didn't understand all the possibilities, there could be light everywhere. And that's definitely not something I want to do, because it ends up
Right.
looking flat and sort of like uncrafted. So there was a learning curve for sure. And I spent a lot of time offset familiarizing myself with all the embedded lighting and what things looked like. But in terms of consistency across the franchise, our show looks different, and um, we embrace that. And there was a question I was asked earlier of, was am I concerned with Star Trek Strange New Worlds, the look of it holding up over
Mm-hmm.
time?
Right.
Which, in a sense, yes, obviously you want everything to sort of like still look great, But because tools change, especially now, very quickly, and audience sensibility changes, um, what I think, I don't think the look will hold up. I think that you look at older shows and they can feel dated. And if you're not used to that sensation, it might be a turnoff. But
Mm-hmm.
when you see older films or things like that, usually there's something that um, you really love about it. And what does hold up, I feel, is the instincts of the filmmakers. The cinematographer, the director, the production design, things like that. So the approach to the lighting, the approach to the storytelling, I think should definitely hold up. And those are the things that I lean on the most, which is, like, not what can you do with the tools, but what shouldn't you do
Right.
to really best tell the story.
Right. Yeah. Like that statement just takes me back to, like when your original few statements about, looking outside of the frame and, like knowing what's outside of the frame and also that kind of determining what's inside of the frame. It's a very similar analogy for sure.
The first episode that I did, and I worked with a director named Valerie Weiss, who we hadn't met until we did our first TV show together called The Rookie. But we grew up not too far from each other outside Philadelphia, but we had never connected until we were sort of on the job together. And she came from a feature background too. So I've only done 3 TV shows. Star Trek Strange New Worlds is my third, but every show I've done an episode with Valerie. So we ended up working together on both of our first Star Trek episode ever, which was the second episode of season 2. And it was a courtroom drama. And it wasn't a very action-packed episode, and there wasn't really much of a strange new world, which they're always like traveling to different planets and things like that. This one was
Hmm.
actually set on Earth in a trial, and it was a much more dramatically focused episode. And we were really, really focused on performance. We built the whole style of the episode around getting the best performances that we could. And it ended up being a really well received episode. And people were saying it was one of the best of like the century, or one of the best Star Trek episodes ever, because it was, focused on the drama, and that's timeless. So
Right.
that was
Wow.
really great vindication that let's just follow our instincts. And even
Right.
though we're in space and we have a lot of tools and we shoot on the volume, like the AR wall, which
Hmm.
is a whole other, you could do a whole podcast just on that.
Right. For
It's
sure.
amazing technology, but again, I think the beauty of that tool is that the cinematographer is now looking at completed images in camera and no longer relying on empty green screens to sort of complete the puzzle.
Right.
So I enjoy the show a lot, and a lot of the audience um, is giving it high marks because they do feel that the writers and creators of the show understand the beauty of the nostalgic Trek, and they're injecting that sensibility into the show, which is like Lawrence of Arabia in space. Let's use the successful filmmaking techniques and not feel like we have to distract too heavily from just good writing and good character. And it's been really fun.
Right, for sure. I think the theme of this podcast is just, finding authenticity, within the frame, and it's like you said, it's not just about the tools. It's not, I mean, that culmination of performance and writing and like, the cinematography, like it's all the things for sure. So, and it seems like, if Trekkies are talking about Star Trek's, that one particular episode being one of the best, and and that has ever come out and start like, then you've definitely done well with, like creating that nice balance of all things creative and art and performance. So that's fantastic.
Yeah, and it was really encouraging to me that um you know at least a section of that audience really does value the basic human interactions, above some of the higher concepts and imagination.
Right.
I think it's always the case. And that is, I don't think I could have brought that to life in the same way without furthering my life experience and bringing that to the table to like better understand the characters. In some ways, that's sort of it. Is as a cinematographer, um, like I was able to listen to Harris Savides, his great cinematographer, before he passed, and he said, you know, I'm just a technician.
Hmm.
This is a person who's done some amazing work and very moving stuff, and incredible instincts, and was a big inspiration to me. And in the audience, we were like arguing with him, like, no, you're not. You're more than a technician, you know? Um, and I'm not quite sure, like, that kind of rattled me for a while, but we are technicians fully, and that is true. That is what we provide, and that's work that has to be done. But I think what informs the technique is like, do you understand the character that you're
Right.
shooting? And
Right.
if you understand them, then your camera will support that.
Right. Man, I think we end with that because that was fantastic. So how can people keep up with what you're doing? Where's the best place to find you?
I am on Instagram, Benji Bakshi DP. I actually just started it this year because I was sort of terrified of social media. And
Hmm.
it got to a point where so many people wanted to like tag me or asked if I was on there. I said, well, all right, I better do it. So
Right.
I'm still building that. So, come be my friend.
Right.
But
Yeah,
also
for
my
sure.
my, my website is benjibakshi.com. Um and other than that, my films and IMDb, and check them out, and hopefully you enjoy them.
Awesome. Well, Benji, thanks so much for coming on the podcast. It's been fantastic, and I really enjoyed this conversation.
Absolutely.
Again, I want to thank Benji for coming on the Capturing Light podcast. Be sure to follow him on Instagram, go to his website, keep up with what he's doing because he's putting out fantastic work. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, Les Gaddis, on Instagram. You can always send me an email, les@gaddisvisuals.com. Thanks so much for sticking with the podcast, listening. I appreciate you, and I'll catch you in the next episode of Capturing Light.
Thanks for listening to Capturing Light with Les Gaddis, a director of photographers podcast. Inspiring and educating filmmakers like you so you can illuminate your vision. A Gaddis Visuals production.